Thank you, Lily. Hello, everyone. Apologies for my enigmatic approach. I damaged my leg a couple of days ago. I was attacked. Stammering and creativity. I've been a stammerer, or stutterer, to our American friends since as long as I can remember, or at least as long as I could speak and listen. Although I was never christened, my given name is Benjamin William Parker, BW, and due to the importance of having to say one's own name, I would always block on the B, Ben. Whilst working at MFI, a furniture store in South Wales in the mid-90s, I would have to answer the telephone with, "Good morning, MFI Carmarthen, Ben speaking, how may I help you?" It was difficult. The manager eventually took me to one side and asked if I could change my name for the purposes of work. It was an intriguing idea, anyway, and I chose Sean because of some Irish heritage, and at that time I was able to slip out my S's easier. Soon enough afterwards, I also changed it by deed poll, and it stuck, and my name became Sean to all but my close family. You can call me what you want. So, where does the stammer come from? All stammers and stammerers are different, but in my case, it's a combination of varying degrees of coming from a very literary family with a highly verbose elder brother, a genetic shadow of a stammer in my father to a lesser degree, and a natural innate self-conscious sensitivity. Most stammerers grow out of the condition by 5 years old, but some more dedicated stammerers persist. Male stammerers outnumber the females by about 4 to 1. It's in fact a basic miracle that speech production develops as normally as it usually does, given the massive complexity of the speech system. Concerned parents are always asking about a cure to stammering. Don't want to demoralize anyone, but this is simply barking up the wrong tree. There is no cure because there is nothing to cure. The stammerer is doing this to themselves, but as they get older and their synapses harden, the patterns become embedded until the stammer has a life of its own. At the time the teenage stammerer is socially self-aware enough to care, the stammer is on its own path, and the blocking that we recognize comes from the embarrassed subject's attempts not to stammer. It's this ability to modify the stammer that, in my opinion, stops it being a disability, and affirmative action, or anything else, are counterproductive and exclusionary, totally self-defeating, in fact. As an absentee father of 2 teenage children, but whom I am in contact with, I have seen that much of my reasoning for not being around enough is a subconscious attempt to protect them from environmental exposure to the stammer. It affects, let alone the tension it can cause in a family. This is a side issue to many other aspects, of course, but it is still relevant and important. Another somewhat overlooked effect of greater speech confidence is a degree of overcompensation when things get easier. As the stammerer understands their own speech, after so many years of keeping things in, the process of letting things out needs to be checked, and the stammerer needs to remember they are a human being first, with an obligation to treat others in a decent way as much as anyone else. The best treatment lies in emotional maturity and a process of acceptance. The stammerer needs to learn there's nothing wrong with however he or she tries to speak, stammer or no stammer, to disempower the stammer, if you like. Through this, when speech becomes the joyous process it should be, as opposed to a terrifying oppressor, we have progress. A stammerer will tend to focus and obsess on certain letters or sounds, building them into phantom problems. The stammerer should remember that there is no one sound in the alphabet that is more difficult to say than any other. With this in mind, the treatment called voluntary stammering is extremely useful in the psychology and practice of treatment. Because we put such undue emphasis on certain problematic letters we believe to be problems, avoid them, get scared of them, we need to falsely stammer or bounce the sound of letters which we believe pose no problem, thus reducing the stress levels in speech and wrong-footing the stammer as such. You see, I really am one. The price of fluency in the mature stammerer is eternal vigilance, with certain controls and awareness of what is going on inside one's own mouth. The stammerer can reduce stress levels to a minimum, but needs not be afraid or ashamed of the blocks. Enjoy the game of speech. Look the black dog on his shoulder, look it in the eye, pat and stroke it, and understand it's not a Doberman pinscher, more a lapdog just wanting some attention. The days of stammerers being forced to speak through a mouthful of pebbles are for the ancient Greeks, and are as useful as portrayals of stammerers as overly sensitive wallflowers terrified of the world. You've seen Colin Firth. The mature stammerer is a being who is patient, aware, above average intelligence, and a good listener, who can't understand the strange thing that he or she does, more baffled than sad. There is a feeling that the brain is working faster and more effectively than the mouth. And the way to counter this is to slow down and separate words. As we get older, it becomes easier to do this with oversight and more enjoyment. Yes, we need to learn to enjoy the stammer and not fear the mistakes or imagined social pressure. It's a dinosaur, rearing its scaly head when the stammerer thinks that what he or she is about to say is important, or at least needs to be heard. Ask a stammerer to speak if they have nothing to say, and you will be amazed by how it drops away. There is a theory which goes that many stammerers are strongly right-brain emphasized people, where the artistic, creative, humanistic sides of life are processed. As speech is produced in the less active left hemisphere, the right brain sees an anomaly in this and tries to interfere or block the process. Add this to the above environmental and genetic factors, and it seems highly likely to me. I'm not a psychologist, though. As I said, the right brain is where the creativity lies. Teaching English as a foreign language, especially from elementary level, is a process of linguistic building. And for anyone interested in word retention and speech production is invaluable. We get to see how a language is constructed in the brain and the mouth, and is allowed the time and freedom to study that process. Teaching English properly is an interactive, creative process in itself, and in the deliberate clarity needed is very useful to the stammerer, particularly in understanding what they are doing to themselves. It works two ways. The stammerer has spent half a lifetime growing inwards and internalizing the world, and processing it in this contemplative way. Through this, or eventually, the secret language of the stammerer is expressed through art, maybe in the most humanistically eloquent way. These people know more about visual, audio, and interpersonal communication than many, having internally processed it over many years and having the acuity to observe how people truly operate around each other. What this leads to is a profound understanding of how others interact, communicate, interfere with each other, make personal mistakes, or establish victories. A roll call of more well-known stutterers illustrates the point. English comedian Rowan Atkinson, actors Samuel L. Jackson, James Earl Jones, Harvey Keitel, Marilyn Monroe, Anthony Quinn, stand-up, Jimmy Stewart, Hugh Grant, Bruce Willis, politicians Ed Balls, Claudius, Demosthenes, Joe Biden, Gordon Brown, Winston Churchill. Or how about the singers and musicians Noel Gallagher, Chris Martin, Kylie Minogue, Peter Murphy from Bauhaus, and Elvis Presley. Colin Firth's performance as the stammering a wartime king in the King's Speech was sympathetic enough, and Michael Palin's Kevin in A Fish Called Wanda truly inspired. Watch that film. Nothing will justify Gareth Gates, though, particularly not his condition. Bad music is still bad music, stutter or no stutter. Don't listen to Gareth. With one of the UK's most popular ever television characters throughout the 1980s, Rowan Atkinson played Edmund Blackadder, sarcastic time-traveling historical character, avoiding or creating nasty situations in equal measure. Atkinson actually used his stammer as a tool, relaxedly overemphasizing the plosive sounds such as Bob, Melchit, etc., and found brilliant, much-loved comic effect. But from modifying the stammer, not exploiting it as a non-stammerer most likely would. When he found international fame as Mr. Bean, I, along with most other adults, was disappointed to see he had stopped speaking entirely. However, singing is a useful point in question. I sing. When we sing, we are thinking from a different part of our brain, or at least using the voice production system in a totally different way. The blocks and repeats disappear as the voice concentrates on the notes, lyrics, intonation, etc. Also, having an object close to the mouth or behind the ear, such as a microphone, has the effect of feeding back to the auditory system, and relaxed modulation becomes natural and easy. This is a useful tool, as are certain gestures, in my case, sometimes invisibly but physically drawing the word out of your mouth between thumb and index finger. One needs to make sure this doesn't become its own bad habit through overuse, of course. Sympathy is counterproductive to the stammerer, as he or she is already afforded too much attention compared to his more regular speaking peers. All stammerers, in their quest to understand what is going on in their mouths, should remember one thing in particular. Everything they have ever heard about themselves, or whatever they have to say, is an opinion, nothing more, and theirs is as important and equally valid as anyone else's. As people who have for years observed, analyzed, processed, held back while evaluating, balancing and waiting, and having much to say, the stammerer is uniquely placed to offer living insights into every aspect of creativity, perhaps not often so clear to the majority. Through them, the dignity of silence effortlessly becomes the color of elucidation. I once met a middle-aged to elderly stammerer in a pub in South Wales, where I grew up. The condition was still there, but had a certain fatigue to it, less tension. I managed to ask him about this, and he replied that he just didn't care anymore. He let the words just come out however they wanted. I decided I wanted this a bit sooner than that, and I received some great advice in the form of speech training at the City Literary Institute in Fleet Street, central London. I have highlighted many things I learned there already, but it occurred how in this new age of emotional honesty, the very reasons themselves for the stammer may fall away. But if they remain, I try to look at them with an absurd gaze and laugh. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So just go on into the word unafraid. Thank you.